Hi everyone. So you can see today I am not in my studio. I'm working from home. And just as many of you guys are all at home, right? So today we're going to make a zipper pouch. And I know a lot of you who've taken classes at my studio have made them there, and some of you have not. So it's a fun project. It's nice because it can be used for so many different things. You can make it into a pencil case or a little purse, or a toy case, a snack bag. It can be so many different things, and you can make them in all different sizes. They're great to give as gifts, and they're great to have for yourself. So we are going to do that today. So what you'll need is one or two different fabrics. One will be the outside, one will be the inside. You can of course use the same fabric for each, and you will also need a zipper and thread. So let's get started. So for this project, I've chosen this turquoise scrap that I have, and also this orange scrap. And I'm going to use the orange scrap for the outside of the bag and the turquoise for the inside of the little pouch bag. And then you also, as I said, you'll need a zipper. And we just want like an all-purpose zipper like this. Preferably not a metal one or an invisible zipper. If you're able to get a regular one like this, that would be the preference. So, as I have mentioned before, I know some of you do not have the kinds of tools that I have at the studio, so we are going to take a book to trace to get the correct size. Now, when you're choosing the size of the pouch, what you want to think about, okay, so this is actually the size that I want to make my pouch, but say I wanted to do a little tiny pouch, okay, then we'd find something small to trace, to go smaller than the size of the zipper. We don't really want something, I mean, you could have something bigger than the zipper, that's fine, because it will just get sewn down smaller. I did find a book that's about the size that I need here, like that, okay? So I'm going to just take my Choco liner here. You can use a pencil, marker, whatever you have handy. I'm going to trace around the outside. Okay, and then we have our rectangle there. Okay, and I'm going to repeat that same thing to my lining fabric before cutting them both out. Now, once you've traced these pieces, if you decide that this is too big, you don't really have to trim it down. Like say you want it to be a shorter bag, like a little kind of skinny, narrow bag. You don't necessarily have to trim it down now, because there is a point when you sew it that you could just sew it shorter. But if you can't find a book or object that is the correct size to trace, if you have a straight ruler or some kind of straight edge, even just taking the book and redrawing a line, you could always move that edge up and draw a new line. So you're kind of getting the overall shape, and you're getting a square shape or a rectangle shape. But then you could bring the line up to change the size a little bit. Okay, so I'm going to pin that together. Just going to put a pin in each corner here. Of course, you don't want to pin on the line because you are going to cut on the line. You don't want the pins in the way. And then we'll cut around the outside. Okay, and then take the pins out, and we will repeat that process on the lining. Actually, this is the lining. We'll repeat it on the outside fabric. So once you've cut your pieces, you should have two squares or rectangles from each fabric. And what we're going to do is we're going to take one layer of our outer fabric. Now basically what happens is the zipper will get sandwiched between the two layers of fabric. So the main fabric is facing up, the zipper is facing down, the lining fabric faces down, and what happens is when it's sewn, the zipper will end up in between the two layers. okay? But we're gonna do that in steps to make it simpler. So take your main fabric, again, have it facing right side up. Take your zipper, the side with the pull is called the right side. That's the good side of the zipper. So we're gonna have that side face down to the fabric. Now, I would suggest not lining up the edge precisely. Okay, so don't line it up like that because it's just too easy for the back to become misaligned and then you miss it. So when you line up like this, leave a little bit of fabric up here at the top like that. So this is one time I say, don't line up your edges. Okay, so we have it pinned like this, and we are going to just sew along this side, now on the side closer to the raw edge of the fabric. Now I don't know if you can see this, but in the middle of the zipper, I'll point with a pin here, there's kind of like a line on the zipper. Often there's almost like a line right here in the middle, and we try to sew right there along that line. So you're just trying to sew in the middle. So if this is the center of the zipper, right there, we are trying to sew in the middle from here to here. So it's like a quarter of the way through here, okay? So let me show you that next. Okay, so I already have my machine threaded and ready to go. And I'm not going to use the zipper foot for this because we don't actually need to sew super close to the zipper. So I find it's easier just to stick with the regular presser foot. Now the only thing that gets tricky is when we want to sew here near the zipper pull. The zipper pull is going to kind of get in the way. The foot's going to kind of bump into it and it's going to cause a problem. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that first pin out and I'm going to unzip the zipper part way. Okay, and then I will just repin the one edge over here, okay? And then I'm gonna line up so that my needle is sewing in the middle of that side of the tape. So bring it in close here so you can kind of see where it's gonna be. Okay, so bring our needle down. We're gonna stitch and back stitch. Okay, and then what we will do is when we get down here close to the zipper pull, we can stop. I leave the needle down, lift up the presser foot, and then I zip up the zipper to get it out of the way. Presser foot can go back down, and then I can continue sewing. Okay, so you only have to go to the end of the zipper if your zipper and your fabric are not the same length. Cut those threads off from each end here. Okay, so when you flip it around then, you have the one side sewn, like that. Next, we are going to put that same piece of fabric on the opposite side, following the same method. Okay, so I have both sides sewn on to the zipper here, so it looks like this from the front. Okay, so we have the zipper facing down to the right side of the fabric on both sides. Okay, so each one flips like this. Okay, you want to make sure those raw edges were lined up here when you sewed it together, so that when it flips this way, it's a clean finished edge. So then what we do is we take each edge individually and we will sew our lining fabric onto it. So if I look at this like this, okay, I have my main fabric facing up, I have the zipper here, and I have the other main fabric facing down towards the first layer, like that. Then we take a lining fabric and place it on top so it covers the zipper. Okay, so all the top edges are lining up. So what's happening is we have fabric, the orange fabric, and the turquoise fabric facing right sides together, and one layer of zipper is in between. Okay, again, so this can get confusing. So you have your main fabric and your lining fabric, and the zipper is in between, and it's closed like that. Okay, so once you get that together, go ahead and pin that in place. And then we are going to sew along that side as well. So the nice thing about sewing the lining on, even though it seems like we're sewing kind of blind because we can't see the zipper, if you are happy with where you sewed your stitching initially when you sewed the main fabric on, you can just sew on top of that same stitching line. So what you want to do is make sure that you flip it over to the main fabric side, it'll be the back side of it, and you just repeat and sew on top of the same stitching line. Now if for some reason you think that stitching was not exactly in the right spot, you, like say you sewed a little too close to the edge over here, you could always bring your stitching in a little bit. It's fine if you sew it and you go back and look at it and you decide you didn't quite sew it right, you could go back and sew it again. You can always seam rip it if you accidentally sew over the zipper, then of course it won't work. So you can always seam rip that and take that out. So again, my zipper pull is in the way up here at the top. So I'm going to take that first pin out, unzip it part way, and pin that back together. I can find my pin. Okay, and this time we are lining up the edges over here on the side. Okay, so I just aim that needle right into where I was stitching before. I'm going to show you that closer there. Okay, and we'll just repeat and do the same thing. Okay, now at a certain point, I'm going to hit my zipper. Now, just so you know, depending on which side you start on first, the zipper pull may not be in the way. Mine was in the way because it was zipped up this direction, but if yours is zipped the other direction, then it wouldn't be in the way till you get to the bottom. So one side is always the reverse of the other side, so just be aware of that. But right now I can tell my zipper pull is right there. So I'm going to go maybe like 2 or 3 more stitches, and then lift up the presser foot and go inside and zip up the zipper. Okay, now it can lay flat here. Press your foot back down. I'll take that pin out. And then finish sewing along the line. Okay, and this time we do want to make sure we sew all the way from end to end, even if the zipper doesn't go all the way to the end. So I'll continue the stitching, because now we're sewing the 2 pieces of fabric together, so we can go all the way to the end. Okay, and we'll cut that off there. Come to the other end and cut that off there. And you can see then we have this side here, and so here is the front side, and here is the back side. Looks nice and clean finished on both sides. Okay, so I'm going to show you how we do the second side, final piece number 4. Okay, so to do the final side, it can get a little bit confusing. I know people always get confused how to get that piece on there, and if I ask them, they start putting it on in all sorts of weird ways, like this, like this. But what we want to do is look at it like this. Let's see here. So your main fabric is facing up. The second main fabric is facing down. The first lining fabric is facing up, and you can see the zipper along the top. And then the second lining fabric is facing down and lining up to cover the zipper along the top. So again, your main fabric is facing up, your second main fabric is facing down, and then the first lining piece is facing up, and the second lining piece is facing down, so it's right sides together, and the second lining piece should cover the zipper up here along the top. Okay, and then you're going to repeat that same process of sewing it along this top edge, following the stitching line that was on the main layer. Okay, so that'll catch this side when we sew this side. Once you have that completed, it should look like this. So you're going to have your main fabric on the outside, the zipper in the middle, and the edges are all clean finished there. Okay, so it's all turned back. And then on the back side is your lining fabric, and again, it's all clean finished along the edge there as well. Okay, so once you are good with that, then we're going to go ahead and press it. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to press this seam here flat on both sides, making sure that the fabric is pulled flat and away from the zipper, okay? So you do want to have this space here. If you found that when you sewed it, you can barely see your zipper, it might not function well. So always double check that the zipper zips and unzips properly, because if it doesn't, you're going to want to not sew so close to the zipper. Okay, so we're going to come in here and just flatten along next to the zipper, like that. And you'll do the same thing on the other side. And it's always good to check on the back as well. Make sure that it is flat back there. It does look flat. And make sure there's no folds in the back side. So go ahead and get the whole thing pressed. Okay, so once you have that pressed flat, it should look like this from the front side, and this from the back side, here nice and flat. Then we're going to do a top stitch along the edge here, close to the zipper, but we're going to sew on the fabric. So an edge stitch just means that you're sewing close to an edge. The top stitch, we're sewing it from the top side, so it is visible, so you do want to try to be careful of how you sew it. And preferably you want to sew nice and close to the edge of the fabric, not down here somewhere. Okay, so it would be easier to sew starting at the end of the zipper where there is not a zipper pull. So we're going to start at the bottom down here. So I have my needle in place, and sometimes because you're sewing so close to the edge of the fabric, if you see there's no fabric on this side here, so really at an edge. Sometimes the machine will have a little bit of trouble getting going and starting to go forward. So you want to start off slow. Sometimes it can be helpful to use the wheel on the side of the machine and just kind of push your fabric, make sure it is advancing and moving forward before you start sewing. Otherwise you might just get a big knot and sew in the same place. So we're moving along, so I'm going to keep sewing with the pedal now. Now, towards the end, the zipper pull might get in the way because I have this weird thing that sticks out of the side of the foot. So I'm going to unzip it just to be on the safe side. And then finish sewing up to the end. Bring up the presser foot. Okay, so just like that, you just want to have a stitch right along the edge like that. Okay, so both sides have been sewn here, and this is where it gets a little confusing. Okay, so we have the back here and the front here. And what we're going to do is we want to sew this so that it has a clean finished edge in the inside of the bag when you open the whole thing up. So what we do is we take your fabric. Actually, first you can unzip the zipper part way, and then you take your fabric and you fold it so that your outer fabric, remember the orange is my outside fabric, and the outer fabric goes right sides together, and the inner fabric goes right sides together. Okay, so now we have orange on top of orange and blue on top of blue. And what we want to do is we want to start in the middle where the zipper is to make sure that's lined up properly, because you might find that depending on how precisely you cut or sew the zipper in, the edges on the sides might not be perfectly aligned, and that's okay. We want to start in the middle. That's the most important part. So we go here to the zipper, and you kind of think, okay, where should this stuff go? How should I fold this? So the zipper itself should actually fold down towards the lining fabric on both sides. Okay, so like that. Fold down like that, and you want to make sure that the zipper is lined up at the top up here. Okay, as best you can, line that up at the top, and then make sure it's pulled flat here and there's no fabric kind of bunched up under the zipper, and then you can pin it over there. And we're going to do the same thing on the other side. So on the other side, it's a little different looking because the zipper is further in here, and on this side it's not open, so it's also a little weird because of that. So we're going to fold the zipper here like this, so it folds towards the blue fabric, which is the lining fabric. Okay, so the seam, the two orange fabrics still go together, but the zipper should be pushed down towards the turquoise fabric, towards the lining fabric. Okay, so you can see that like that. The zipper's kind of folded up in half over here, and again, it's pulled flat there. So it's a little bit weird there. Hopefully you can see that okay, how that lines up like that. And then we're going to pin it on that side. Okay, and then once you have that like that, you can continue to pin around the whole outside of this. Okay, so what you would do is work your way from this center point outward so that if the edges are not perfectly aligned, you can just let them be off. Just keep it flat, pulled out, and if the edges are kind of off, don't worry. Just when you sew it, you have to make sure you catch both edges, even if it's not perfectly straight looking, that's okay. So just try to get everything kind of pulled out flat and then pin around the outside. Okay, so when you're ready to sew around the outside of this, the one thing you want to be careful of is that along this side, now for in my case, my fabric is longer than the zipper, so I want to make sure that when I sew it, I actually catch the zipper and not just the fabric over here, just because it'll look better that way. It'll still function the other way, but it just looks better if you catch the zipper as well. The other thing we want to worry about is that we don't hit that metal zipper stop. Okay, so you want to be aware of where that is, because sometimes it might be right in the line of where your sewing is. So you kind of want to look at that and say, okay, where do I need to sew so that I'm not hitting the metal part, but I'm catching the zipper? And for me, that looks about right. So I'm making myself a mark, and then I'm going to put that pin back in there. And then on the other side, we have a similar situation. Okay, so over here, there's these little metal bits at the end of the zipper, and we don't want to hit that, okay? Because you might break your needle if you hit it. So if you want to mark either sewing to the inside or to the outside of that mark, I am going to sew to the outside of the mark. Okay, so I know where I need to be there. And then we will be ready to sew around the outside. Now, when you sew around the outside, the other thing is you're going to want to leave a hole in the lining in the middle here at the bottom. So the blue fabric is my lining fabric, and I'm going to leave a hole in the bottom to turn this right side out. So I'm going to mark an opening 3 or so inches big. Okay, it really depends also on how large your pouch is. if you have a tiny pouch, maybe you can't leave such a big opening, but we're gonna leave an opening like this so that we know where to sew around the outside. And what we'll do is we will start at the 1 mark, continue around, making sure to go across where this mark is, continue around, and again, making sure we go across this mark here and back to the beginning. So you start at one end of the hole and you end at the other end of the hole. And in the corners, you'll pivot with the needle down. So I have myself positioned at that 1 opening mark, and I'm going to do a few stitches and then back stitch. Now, for the most part, I'm doing about a 1/2 inch seam allowance and staying with the edge of the presser foot, but because my sides are a little bit off where I want to sew from each other, I am going to make sure that I hit that mark straight. So what I'm going to do, now you could draw yourself a line along the side so you know exactly where to go, and that would be fine. I am going to eyeball it. So I'm going to stop a little sooner than normal. Let's say maybe about there. And then we'll lift up the presser foot. I'm going to see if it looks like it's lined up with the mark. I think I want to go 1 more stitch here. Okay, and then we're going to go like this. And again, you could draw yourself a line all the way around the outside so you know exactly where to go. Now, you can sew across the zipper. In my case, I'm not actually sewing across the zipper, I'm sewing across the fabric part of it. You know, as long as you have it marked where you should be sewing, you should be good. But you might need to push a little bit to help it go under the presser foot. And it will sound a little louder like that also, and that's okay. Okay, so just keep that straight there. Now across the bottom, I'm going to do that same 1/2 inch seam allowance that I did on the other side. Okay, and then we're going to sew across the bottom here. Okay, now my edge here is a little bit off, and that's just something is a little bit off somewhere, but I wanted to make sure this whole thing was flat, so I'm leaving that go. I'm not forcing it together, but I'm going to choose to line up with the smaller edge since there's a slight difference. Let me show you that there. Okay, so just come in with the smaller edge if something like that happens so that you make sure you catch everything okay. Okay, now again, I'm going to look out for where my red mark is down here so I know about where I need to turn. Okay, let's see if that looks good. 1 or 2 more stitches. I think that should be good. Okay, and then we're going to sew along this side here. Now, if you want, you can double check that your zipper looks lined up properly as you move around. And again, you might need to help a little bit there. Okay. Got a little bit caught on the foot back here. If you noticed, it bunched up a little bit behind here. I just pushed it back. It got caught on the little knob on the foot. Okay, leave the needle down to pivot, lift up the presser foot, and turn to go the other way. Presser foot back down, and then we continue on. So it is important you remember when you pivot in these corners that your needle is always down when you lift up the presser foot to go the other direction. If it's up in the air, you will lose your spot. Get a weird loose corner, and you don't want that on a bag. Okay, so we did our back stitching. Lift up the needle and the presser foot. Cut the threads from both ends here. And then we are going to trim or clip the corners. So this is a fairly large amount here to cut off because we sewed a little further in here, but that's okay. We're going to just trim that down. And again, not too close to the stitching. We don't want to fall apart, but this is again just to eliminate some bulk there so we get pointier corners. So we're going to go ahead and trim all the corners so we can flip this right side out. Okay, so besides trimming the corners, the 4 corners, I'm also going to take this side that has kind of a rather large seam allowance. I'm going to trim that down as well because it's just not necessary to have all of that fabric in there, and it's going to make it really kind of bulky inside. Okay, you can also choose to trim down the area right in the middle a little bit extra where the zipper was. Okay, just kind of like that to eliminate some of that extra thick bulk there. Okay, so just took like a chunk out there. And then we go down here to the hole and the lining, and we're going to flip it, find that hole there, we're going to flip it inside out. Now, if you remember, we left the zipper open about halfway, and that way we can flip everything through both holes, through the zipper and through the lining hole. Okay, so it kind of looks like this coming around. Okay, now you can unzip the zipper all the way if you need to help. Okay, and then I'm going to put my finger in here and push out the bottom corners of the pouch. This. So this is kind of similar to the tote bag if you did that project. Okay, and then again we have the hole left in the lining that we need to sew shut. So when you sew it shut, just like with the tote bag, if you did that, you're going to bring these edges together. Okay, but we want to make sure that the raw edge here is tucked inside. We don't want these raw edges poking up like this. Make sure they're tucked inside like that. And then you just want to make sure that they are lined up right on top of each other. And you can just give that kind of like a good finger press. You can pin it together if you need to. And then you're going to sew that shut. Okay, so I went ahead and pinned this together, and I have a pin where I want to start sewing and where I want to end sewing, just to make it a little easier to find where I need to go. And you do want to make sure that you sew this close to the edge, because if you sew too far in, that inner part of the fabric might pop out, that raw edge, and then you get a weird lip at the edge. So we want to try to sew this close to the edge over here. I'm going to back stitch like normal. You just want to make sure as you're doing this that you're definitely catching both layers of fabric. Back stitch at that end. Okay, once you have that sewn there, then we can tuck this inside and we're going to be all done. Okay, so let's tuck that inside, the turquoise fabric inside of the orange fabric, and just kind of push both corners out together into the into their corners. Push them into each other. So you don't do anything to secure the bottom of it together. Once you use it, it just kind of holds it all together down there. So you just want to kind of push those edges in there. And then at the top, just kind of push out the top corners as best you can where the zipper is. Okay. And we can zip it shut. And there you go. You have your zipper pouch. So enjoy making them. Make a whole bunch just like your scrunchies, and save them for gifts for your friends.